Hey everyone, welcome to the second week of poetry for Literature 100, Introduction to Literature at George Fox. Let's take a look at our agenda and then we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. So after we take a look at our Calvin and Hobbes inspiration, there's a few concepts within the following categories I'd like to go through, kind of just at a 30,000 foot view before you dive into them in your text. And then there's two poems I'd like to stop and take a little bit deeper of a look at. So here is your Calvin and Hobbes inspiration. Calvin saying, hey Hobbes, what's a paper tiger? He says, it's like a paper boy, you know, a tiger with a newspaper root. Oh, this book makes no sense at all. You might be feeling like that with some of the poetry, but that's okay. Hopefully, with a little bit more practice, it'll become a little bit more clear to you. So let's first talk about sound. The first concept I want to talk about with sound is euphony versus cacophony. The first question I usually get from students is, how do you pronounce these words? And I'll go through them really slowly. It's euphony and cacophony. The thing I like about euphony and cacophony is that they remind you what they are just based on how they sound. So remember that euphony is a mixture of phrases or words that sound very soft. So if you say, I swung the cellar door, you can hear that. I swung the cellar door. It kind of flows together. It's very soft and gentle. Contrast this with cacophony, which you're actually like literally coughing in the middle of the word. His fingers rapped and pounded the door. Obviously, I emphasized it a little bit there, but rapped and pounded. You're hearing syllables are a lot more abrupt. It's important, especially this week, to pay attention to the syllables and what they sound like, and to really just slow down when you're reading, and to make sure that you're reading out loud because it's really going to help you out. Sometimes people ask me, okay, so, but, we're studying euphony and cacophony, but is it really like, is this something that the authors intended when, were they saying that I want to have, a poem that had a lot of euphony in it? And that's probably not the case, but we use words like euphony and cacophony to be able to describe what we're seeing, right? So a poet is probably going to sit down and say, I want to describe, this feeling, what it was like, and they might use words that have more cacophony. But as readers and as critics, we're able to describe these using these terms. Okay, let's talk a little bit about rhyme. So rhyme, as you know, and have probably known since before kindergarten, is an identical or similar vowel sound. Rhyme is really important, especially in poetry, because it gives us a sense of flow. If you think about the predictability of a song, if you have a favorite song, and let's say that you forgot, one of the lyrics, you could probably figure it out based on the rhyming of the other parts of the song. If you listen to Katy Perry or any of the other top 40 artists, you can really hear this because they want to make those songs with the hooks, very predictable. In addition to giving us a sense of flow, it can also surprise us by some clever wordplay or things that maybe are kind of surprising to see together. So, for example, your book gave you the two words decay and May. So if I'm thinking of the season of May, or the month of May, I'm thinking of the season of spring, right? A lot of growth and beauty. But if I'm having the word decay right next to it, initially I'm thinking like, oh, May, decay. It kind of sounds really pleasant. But then when I take a closer look, I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, there's something going on here because May is not a time of decay, right? Then there's two different types of rhyme, based on how they sound. So the first one is exact rhyme. This is where the sounds after the vowel are the exact same. This is the kind of the kindergarten definition, right? But I've highlighted it in red here so you can kind of see the specific part. I'm just going to say it really slowly so you can hear me enunciate that syllable. So time, lime, bat, cat, walk, talk. Now you probably haven't said syllables like this since you were in kindergarten, or unless you have kids and we're teaching them, about rhyming or about phonics, or about how to, say words phonetically. But I do think it's important to just always remind ourselves kind of where it's specifically rhyming, and you can see it's after the vowel in each of these cases. Now, exact rhyme is contrasted with slant rhyme, which sounds a little bit off. This is where the consonant sounds in a word are similar. The purpose of slant rhyme is to kind of pull words together that they don't have the, I guess, privilege of rhyming, but to kind of still give it that flow. So you can look here and you can see that I've emphasized the n sound in each of these. So I'm going to go through it and I will emphasize these for you. Bone, moon, rain, green, gun, thin. So you hear the n sound in each one. Now, if I said to, any kindergartner, does moon rhyme with bone? They would say no, but once they get into college, they can say, well, not an exact rhyme, but as a slant rhyme, they definitely do. So why don't you go ahead and hit pause, and then what I want you to do is go through that, that second set of those three and see if you can identify the one to yourself. So hit pause, say them out loud to yourselves, and then unpause, and we'll go through them together. Okay, so we have park and cart. So park, cart. Hear that R part in the middle is the consonant that is has a similar sound to it. There and here, same R consonant sound. And sing and sung. So the NG comes together to make that ng sound. And so some people ask, so what's the purpose of these? And like I said before, it kind of pulls them together. So if you hear like, oh, here and there was, we went here and there, or he was talking in a sing-song voice. It still kind of pulls them together to give it a little bit more of a cohesive nature. Let's talk a little bit about masculine versus feminine rhyme. In language, if you've taken a foreign language, especially a Romance language like Latin or Italian or Spanish, you'll know that there's masculine and feminine words and approaches to words. And so this is English isn't one of those languages, but we do describe in literary studies masculine and feminine, or ascribe masculine and feminine to different concepts. So this is one of them. So a masculine rhyme is going to have more of a beat to it, and it's going to be, for the most part, it's going to be a single syllable word, and it's going to rhyme on that final syllable. So take a look at this one. Time for a dime to chime. It's stressed and it's a little bit more abrupt. Time for a dime to chime. Time, dime, chime. It kind of gives it more of a beat. Whereas this is contrasted with a feminine rhyme, which has multiple syllables and it's non-stressed on the last. So listen to this one. It's curvy, it's nervy. It's measure, it's pleasure. So each of these words has multiple syllables to them, and they rhyme on the last syllable, but it's non-stressed. So where you hear me say dime, you hear me emphasizing the m part. Whereas here it's curvy, it's nervy, it's measure, it's pleasure. You kind of hear my voice going down a little bit. Feminine rhyme schemes can kind of give us more of a musical tone to them. So if you look at the graphic on the left, it says, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. That would be a masculine rhyme scheme because these are single syllable words that are stressed, and you kind of hear that beat to it. A lot of times in kids rhymes or nursery tales, things like that, you'll hear more of masculine rhyme. All right, talk a little bit about rhythm. So when we talk about stressing syllables, it just means the syllable that we emphasize in a word, and that can be really hard to hear, especially when we're speaking, because we don't really pay attention to it. We're paying attention to the content of the words. So you really have to slow down and speak out loud. And so I'm going to read that first line again, and I want you to hear the parts that that my mouth is stressing. Stress is the syllable we emphasize in a word. So you can kind of hear, obviously I'm overdoing it, but those are the parts that are stressed. So if you look at the word syllable, you hear me, I'm emphasizing syll quite a bit, much more than lable. So this kind of creates, when you're looking at in poetry, it kind of creates a rhythm or almost like a heartbeat. I want to talk a little bit more about the heartbeat in a second. But first, if it's not a stressed syllable, it's called a slack syllable. So if you know a slacker, you can kind of use that to remind yourselves. So One thing that I found was kind of cool in the last, we've been looking at heart sounds in the last week, and actually, I never thought, my English education would help me in my healthcare education, but here it is. So our heart has two sounds. The first is lub, and the next one is dub. So a heart is lub dub, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. So it's not stressed or it's slack on that first beat, and then it's stressed on that second beat. It makes sense because when it's stressed, your heart is doing the majority of the pumping out to your body. I thought that was just kind of interesting when I was preparing this lecture and we were talking about heart sounds this week. So you can think of the heartbeat of the poem as kind of that rhythm. Now, when we have rhythm in a poem or a heartbeat, we call it the meter. So meter is just describing the rhythm that we hear in the poem. I'd like to go through some examples together on page 480. So if you have your book, go ahead and grab that and open to page 480 there. If you need to, go ahead and pause, and you can start up again once you get it. But on page 480 toward the bottom, I want to go through the exercise at the very bottom. And I want you to pay attention to specifically, not so much the content, although they're both fairly interesting in their own right, but I want you to pay attention to kind of what your mind wants to do, if it wants to keep on going or if it feels kind of abrupt. So let's start with the first one. I couldn't be cooler, I come from Missoula, and I rope and I chew and I ride. But I'm a heroin dealer and I drive a four-wheeler with stereo speakers inside. My old lady Phoebe's off ripping off CBs, from rigs to the wagon wheel bar, near a Montana truck stop and a shit out of luck stop for a trucker who's driven too far. So we hear a really sing-songy rhythm in there, right? Each line kind of wants to pull us into the next one. I couldn't be cooler. I come from Missoula, and I rope and I chew and I ride. As readers, we almost have that sense like, oh, okay, give us the next beat. It almost feels like a gallop. Now contrast this with the second one. Oh, newsprint, moonprint, Maryland, rub ink from a finger to make your beauty mark. So we feel it's much more abrupt there. After that first line, we're like, okay, there might be a little bit of a rhythm to this, and then we hear rub ink from a finger to make your beauty mark. And we hear that emphasis at the end, mark, and it really just kind of drops us off. There's almost a sense of permanency there, which the author might be using because, a beauty mark might be something that's permanent. So really strong rhythms in both of these. And it helps create an atmosphere that is appropriate for the poem. So this first one, this guy's kind of talking about how he's kind of living life on the edge, right? He ropes, he chews, he rides. He's a heroin dealer. He drives a four-wheeler with stereo speakers inside. He kind of has this laissez-faire approach to life that kind of goes along with the rhythm. So we can create an atmosphere that is appropriate, and I said also perhaps opposite for the poem. So sometimes what poets will do is there will be kind of a sing-songy rhythm to it, or a sing-songy meter to it, I should say. But it's dealing with a really somber and serious subject, or vice versa. And that kind of what the purpose of that is to draw the attention of the reader to kind of their message. So we're talking about meter, which is kind of the beat. And there's 4 different meters in English poetry. There's iambic, anapestic, trochaic, and dialectic. And so these are gone into more detail in your text. But the one that you'll probably find most common is iambic. And you see here we have an iamb. Let me get my pen here. And an iamb is just that beat, right? So specifically for an iamb, it's 1-2, a non-stressed and then a stressed, da-dum. And then you might have heard someone say the term iambic pentameter, and you're like, I know that has something to do with poetry, but I don't really know what that means. So what we do is iamb describes the type of beat that it is, and then we talk about the measurement of it. So we talk about that in terms of feet. So a foot is just a set of beats. So this is an iamb, and within this box we have 5 iambs. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So iambic pentameter. If we had an anapestic beat and we had 2 of them, it would be anapestic diameter, or dimeter, I'm sorry. And if we had a trochaic beat and there was 3 of them, it'd be trochaic tetrameter. So what it is it's really just a way for when you look at a line of poetry to measure and describe it. All of these terms we use in order to describe poetry. It helps you sound smart at parties, yes, but that's just kind of a side benefit. Let's talk a little bit about closed versus open form. So closed form is poetry that follows a set pattern. You might think of like a Shakespearean sonnet or kind of Old English poetry. And the reason that poetry at a time followed a very specific or a set pattern was because the primary means of transmitting poetry was orally, right? We would recite them to each other. And it kind of helped you, keep you in line so you didn't forget any part of it, and kind of gave it a rhythm. Closed rhyme schemes, I'm sorry, not closed rhyme schemes. Closed poetry might have a specific rhyme scheme described in terms of letters. I gave you a couple examples here, and I'll go into more detail about that when we talk about one of our poems. Closed form can be blank verse where it's just, kind of one giant long stanza, or they might have specific styles of stanza, and we describe those as couplets, which would be a stanza made of 2 lines, tercets, 3 lines, quatrains, 4 lines, etc. The ones that you'll probably most often see are quatrains, so stanzas with 4 lines in it. And this is all in contrast to open poetry, open form poetry. Open form poetry became more popular, especially when we were writing poetry down. And when people started to kind of move away from some of the traditional forms. It can have rhyme schemes, it can be devoid of rhyme, it can have really unusual patterns as far as the way that the text looks on the page. It can emphasize different things, punctuation or spellings or even spacing of words might look different. If you look in your book, especially at E.E. Cummings, he has an open form poetry style that is really unusual, and it kind of draws the reader in almost on a different level. So when you're looking at poems, you just want to make sure that you're thinking about, is this, a closed or an open form? So let's talk, but also take a look at a couple of poems. The first one I'd like to look at is a closed form poem, and this is Stopping by Woods on Snowy Evening. I'm going to read through this once, and then we're going to go through and kind of analyze it in terms of what we discussed earlier. Stopping by woods on snowy evening. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and a frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So this is a really wonderful poem. Robert Frost is, probably the quintessential American poet. You've likely heard this poem before. It's discussing, the speaker is on a journey of some sort and is pausing kind of between, the village and the woods, and he's looking out into the woods and seeing the snow falling really softly on the tree limbs and kind of piling up. One of those really beautiful winter nights where it's if it's snowing, it's really crisp outside, and it's just a very gentle, beautiful scene. It's one of those moments where he takes a pause and just kind of thinks about life. And there's something that's drawing him, to the village or his, responsibilities of life, but there's something very alluring about the woods. And people have debated about the interpretation of that. But we see it in the last stanza, he talks about the woods being lovely, dark, and deep, but he has promises to keep, or there's some other type of responsibility in his life, and miles to go before he sleeps, which could be referring both to the literal journey that he's on. He has to get home to go to bed, right? Or it could also mean on a deeper level, he has some type of responsibility or obligation before he sleeps, either relaxes in dreams or dies. So beautiful poem, but let's take a look a little bit at kind of some of the ways to describe it that we talked about. So the first thing I'm going to notice is that it follows a very closed form. So we have 4 stanzas here, and in each stanza we have 4 lines. And so that is going to be called a quatrain. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go through and I'm going to see if I can figure out what the rhyme scheme is. So let's see here. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. Okay, so know, though, and snow all rhyme. So the way I'm going to describe this rhyme scheme is I'm going to write it's A, B, and A. Sorry for my really poor PowerPoint writing there. So A, B, A. B is the standout here. Now for the next stanza, I'm going to look through queer, near, lake, year. Okay, so I noticed that the third line in each quatrain is the one that is not rhyming. So queer, near, year all rhyme together. But I noticed that that queer, near, and year rhyme with here. So this is actually described as B, B, C, B. Okay, and let's see if it follows it again. Shake, mistake, sweep, flake. Okay, so shake and lake. Okay, so we're going to describe this as a C, C, D, and C. Then deep, keep, sleep, sleep. Okay, so it's sweep, and this rhymes with all of them. So this is going to be D, 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 D. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, like, what's the point of this? Well, what it does, it can actually kind of give you some interpretations, or it kind of add to your analysis. So we see here that B is connected to here, and then C is connected to here, and then it's connected to here, right? So we see that kind of each stanza, which is made up of the stanza is a quatrain. So each of these quatrains is interrelated with each other. And then we see the last one, there's almost kind of a sense of finality to it, because there's no outlier rhyme there. So the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Especially with that repetition there, kind of gives us that sense of finality. So I've looked at the rhyme scheme. I know that it's 4 stanzas, 4 lines, so it's a quatrain. But I also want to know what the meter is. So I know that each one is kind of the same, so let's go through and see if we can figure that out. Whose woods these are, I think I know. Whose woods these are, I think I know. Whose woods these are, I think I know. Okay, so you can start to hear what is being emphasized. So this is the slacker, this is the stressed, slacker, stressed, slacker, stressed, slacker, stressed. Okay, whose woods these are, I think I know. Okay, and I see that it's kind of divided up into 4. So I know that I would divide it here and here and here. Okay, so I know that 4 feet would be tetrameter. And then this would be, it's an IM, the type of rhythm it is, which is the unstressed and then the stressed. So I would describe this line, or I would describe the poem, as being written in iambic or tetrameter, made up of quatrains. And so what you can do is, obviously you can sound really smart now if someone talks about Robert Frost stopping odes on snowy evening. You can say, oh yeah, I was studying that the other day, and it's written in iambic tetrameter, which really, kind of helps it flow along together. So a really good look at, kind of the steps you would take to analyze a closed form poem. Now let's take a look at another one of my favorite poems. This is by Langston Hughes. This is The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Langston Hughes was the poet laureate, or kind of the king of poetry of the Harlem Renaissance, which was a time period in the early 1900s in Harlem where there was a really huge influx of art and music and poetry, and just this beautiful revival, and a lot of really amazing works came out of this period of time. And so this is free verse, and I want you to think about rivers as we read through it, and kind of the way that he set it up. The Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human and human veins. I'm sorry, let me actually start that over because I did not say that correctly. The Negro speaks of rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep, like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when the dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So Hughes here is talking from the point of view of an African American speaker who is using rivers as kind of the way that he is connecting himself to humanity, and then using them specifically, four of the major rivers, in the world: the Euphrates, Congo, Nile, and Mississippi. Um, Major rivers which have played, different roles in the life of someone who has an African heritage. Um, we talk about the Euphrates and the Congo, and the Nile are back in either Africa or the Middle East. But what I think is interesting is that the Nile raised the pyramids above it. There's a definite allusion to slavery here. And he talks about hearing the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. The Mississippi is in the South, which was during the time of the Civil War, a clear reference to Abe Lincoln there. And its muddy bosom turned all golden in the sunset. So that might be an allusion to, a brighter future ahead, or the sunset on slavery. But in any case, he's definitely talking about how his soul has a very deep connection to the earth and to humanity. Now I want to take kind of a look at the way that Hughes has structured this poem. So we know that the main topic is rivers, right? But looking at specifically at the way that he's positioned the words on the page, you can kind of see that there's almost a flow to it. So we see that's kind of flowing back and forth, almost like a river, right? This is something called enjambment, when it's one sentence but it continues on to another line. So like right here, you would still read this as, I've known rivers as ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. You wouldn't say it like, I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. So the poem like this, you continue reading on to the next line. But you see that there's kind of that flow there. And then this next part, when you heard me, I kind of had to flow back and forth. And as readers, our eyes are going to the end, and then to the end, and then to the end, and then to the end. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. So a lot of euphony here, right? It's a very gentle kind of flow to it, right? And so he's using words that sound have definitely a very gentle tone to them to kind of give us that image of rivers flowing. And so we see here that we're kind of flowing. I'm drawing poorly here, but you know what I mean. So going back and forth here. I'm also noticing just kind of some repetition from these two lines and then these two lines here. And so we see that the description of the four rivers, those life-giving rivers, are right in the middle. And then he repeats at the end, my soul has grown deep like the rivers. A lot of I statements in here. And so he's, definitely talking about his, his personal experience and considering, maybe his ancestral heritage or the way that African Americans have been treated and, kind of their history as an ethnic or racial group. So definitely, this is definitely considered, open form, and this would be considered free verse here. So we don't really see a rhyme scheme. We could try to see if there was a meter, but what would likely happen is that we would find that there's a different meter for each sentence. So this is more so for the author to kind of give us an experience of the poem. It's a really, really interesting poem here, especially with the way that he is positioned it on the page. And you'll see that, like I said, with E. E. Cummings and some other authors in your text, kind of having that word play with actually, publishing it onto the page. So Okay, well, hopefully that was helpful to you to describe, be able to describe poetry a little bit more in detail. If you have any questions, definitely please reach out to me online or shoot me a text or an email, and I'm more than happy to help you out with whatever. So hopefully you're doing well, and I will see you online.